So in order to write a piecewise function when you are given a graph, you need to make sure you follow a couple steps. So the first is you want to identify the equation of the first piece, so your slope and your y-intercept. Then you want to find the domain of the first piece and write it as an inequality. And then you're going to repeat these steps for all the pieces that you have in your graph. So let's look at some examples together. So we look at the very first piece. So this is what's highlighted in red. So you see what your y-intercept is, which is -2. Then identify your slope, and I can identify the slope by continuing on the line, going from left to right, and I see that my slope is down 1 and to the right 2, so -1/2. And then I want to think about the domain. So notice that your function changes when x is 2. So that's your endpoint. So with the domain of the red piece, I want to look at where my domain is pointing towards. So my line is pointing to x values that are less than 2. Now it's less than and not less than or equal to because your endpoint for the red piece is an open circle. So that domain is x's that are less than 2. So that's going to be the domain part written as an inequality. So there's the first piece of my graph. Now I'm going to repeat this for the second piece. That second piece, which is green, again, I'm going to look at what my y-intercept and my slope is. So the very first thing that I can see is my slope is 2. Following that line, I can go up 2 and to the right 1, so my slope is 2. And if I continue backwards to find out what that y-intercept would be, it would be a -2. So here's the first part of my green piece, which is 2x minus 1. That's the equation. Then I want to look at the domain. So now looking where your x's are for the green piece, I look and see my line is pointing towards the right. So I'm looking at x's that are greater than 2. Now it's not only a greater than, it's a greater than or equal to because at that endpoint, at that 2, I have a closed circle. Now that's going to be the domain written as an inequality for the green equation. Okay, here we go. Let's continue. So for the red part of your graph, let's figure out what the y-intercept and the slope is. So my y-intercept is a -2. My slope would be a -1 as I continue on that graph, which means for the equation of my red part, I have a -x minus 2. So now I want to think about the red piece. The line points towards the left where your x's are less than 2. Now it's not only less than 2, it's less than or equal to 2 because that endpoint has a closed circle. So for the domain, I'm going to write if x is less than or equal to 2. Now we're going to go on to the green. Again, figuring out what my slope and y-intercept is. My slope is a +2 with my y-intercept being a -3. So I have as my equation 2x minus 3. Now for the domain, my line is pointing towards the right where your x's are greater than 2, and it is going to stay as a greater than 2 because at that endpoint you do have an open circle. Notice in this graph, you don't have any arrows, you just have line segments, but you still follow the same process. So for the red piece, I'm going to find that my slope is a -1. And if I had to continue, I find my y-intercept is a +3. So I write -x plus 3. And I want to find my domain. Now, notice that the domain, I'm now going to look at the endpoint. So I'm going to look at where I have those 2 closed circles. So I have a -5 and I also have a -2. Now I do need to write a different type of inequality with that x in between -5 and -2 because that's how I write the domain of a line segment. I'm going to list the actual endpoints. So I have less than or equal to, less than or equal to for both because both of those circles are closed. So that would be my domain if -5 is less than x, which is less than -2. The x variable is in between those two x numbers. Okay, so now let us continue on with the second piece. We're now going to look at the green. So again, finding my y-intercept and slope. And my y-intercept of 6 with my slope of 1. So I have x plus 6. And then my domain, again, I'm looking in between two x values. I'm looking in between -2 and a +3. Now I have open circles on both of those ends. So my domain is going to be -2 less than x, which is less than 3. Okay, so we have another piecewise function, and its graph does not have any arrows, so still the same steps as we've done before. We look at the red, find out what your y-intercept and your slope is. So my y-intercept is 1, and my slope is 2/3. So I have 2/3 x plus 1, and my domain between two x values of -6 and a +3. Notice I have open circles on both, so I do have just less thans for my domain between those two x values. And now to the next piece, which is the green one. Again, figuring out what my slope would be, and then my y-intercept of 5. I have -2/3 x plus 5. In my domain, I'm going to be looking at 3 and 6, and I do have an open circle on the 3 and a closed circle on that 6. As you write that domain, notice around that 3, you're going to have a less than, and next to that 6, you're going to have a less than or equal to. Okay, some things for you to remember. Make sure you write your domain as an inequality, and you want to think of the endpoints. So make sure, do I have an open circle, do I have a closed circle, or do I have an arrow? Now, if you found this video helpful, don't forget to hit like and subscribe for notifications on new videos. Thanks for watching!